Mr. President, I have
inquiry for the Senator from Wisconsin. Am I the senator from Mississippi you were referring to?
Vermont.
Thank you.
Mr. President, I have profound respect and admiration for both the senator from Alabama and the senator from Vermont. And you can tell from their remarks, they're congenial, collegial, delightful people. They've also got many decades of legislative experience between the two of them. And the country has been blessed by their gifts, their talents, and their willingness to work hard. I want to respond to a couple of points made a moment ago, points suggesting perhaps that the answer to all of this is simply a desire to work together, as if that were somehow not what we have in mind. We were also told a moment ago that they're almost finished with the appropriation process, that it's almost complete. Now, if that's the case, then I would ask the question, why haven't we been permitted to see it? Why haven't the other members of the United States Senate been able to see that? It is a little bit hard for some of us to hear that if we all work together, that we can get this done, when that is literally all we're asking. Now, I don't think any one of us supporting Senator Johnson's legislation is here saying that it's perfect, or here saying that it would magically solve every problem in the world, or even every problem in the United States Senate having to do with the spending process. We're not saying that. But what we are saying is that without it, we will stay stuck in the same closed-loop system. So to suggest that there's somehow a lack of desire on our part, or on the part of anyone who's not an appropriator, or anyone who's not the chairman and ranking member of the Appropriations Committee, that this is somehow the product of a lack of desire and willingness to work together, that's not fair. That's not accurate. That's quite the opposite of the truth. What we're asking for is for a seat at the table. Now, Article 5 of the Constitution outlines the procedure for amending the Constitution, for making changes to the structure of government that we have, what it may and may not do. Article 6 of the Constitution preemptively disposes of any proposed constitutional amendment that would alter the principle of equal representation in the Senate. It's the one rule that cannot be changed. It's so fundamental to our system of government, to this system of government that has helped foster the development of the greatest civilization the world has ever known, is that in this chamber, every state has to be represented equally. That doesn't happen, and indeed it can't happen, when you have some of the most significant measures that will ever come before this body that are commandeered by one committee, the Committee on Appropriations. Now, granted, as has been suggested in the last couple of speeches we've heard, we've got some great talent among our members on the Appropriations Committee. We've got great talent among the staffers on the Appropriations Committee. They work really hard, they're really smart, they're really determined, and they're highly specialized. That isn't the problem. The problem is that in most circumstances, because of the way we bring things up, most of us are completely disenfranchised from the process. This doesn't mean that it's the fault of the Appropriations Committee. I don't believe that it is. It is instead a fault of the way in which we schedule votes, and the fact that these things aren't brought up until the last possible minute. And then we're given this awful Hobson's choice of vote for a whole bunch of things that you don't necessarily support and can't even completely know about, or vote against it and be blamed for a government shutdown. That's all this bill is trying to do, is to get us out of that toxic loop, a loop that is the opposite of collegial, the opposite of respectful, and that is utterly incompatible with the principle of equal representation in the Senate, a principle that cannot be undone even by a constitutional amendment.
Senator, yield for a question.
Yes, I will.
Should we be able to represent our constituents? Of course. He and I agree, and he and I have agreed on a lot of different things, especially constitutional issues in this body. And I share a concern of suddenly being handed a piece of legislation on this. We're going to vote on it in 10 minutes, an hour or so. Would he agree with me that if the leaders said Tuesday of next week, say this was done early in the year, Tuesday of next week we'll bring up this part of the appropriations bill from the committee having voted on it, Republicans and Democrats, I think it's close to a third of the U.S. Senate's on that committee, having voted on it, and it'll be open to amendments. And then when we finish that one, we'll bring up the next one. Would that cover much of the problems the senator from Utah has?
In response to the question, the answer is yes, absolutely yes. That's exactly what we want. That is exactly what we deserve. And this is one of many manifestations of the fact that my friend and distinguished colleague, the senior senator from Vermont, has the benefit of many decades of experience in this body. He's been here at times when the Senate has functioned precisely like that, as it should. That's exactly what we want. That's how the Senate is supposed to function. That's how it has functioned for most of the existence of our great republic. And so that in and of itself would not only help address the problem, it would be the solution to the problem. And that's why I insist this is not a problem that can be fairly laid at the feet of the individual members of the Appropriation Committee, or even necessarily the chairman and ranking member of the Appropriations Committee. This is a problem with the way in which we schedule votes, and it's also a problem related to the first, with a lack of willingness to allow amendments to be brought. The filibuster is itself maligned and often misunderstood. But the purpose of the filibuster, from the very origins of this institution, was to allow for theoretically unlimited debate, discussion, and opportunities for amendments to legislation. Nowhere would that be more important than in the case of where we are spending the public's money. That's what we're supposed to be doing. That's how it always did work in the past. It's the very reason why we have the filibuster rule to begin with, is to allow for and facilitate and encourage unlimited debate, discussion, and amendments. So yeah, I wish this legislation weren't necessary. But it is with precisely that objective in mind that we've pushed this legislation. Why? Well, some of us have been here for many years. In the case of Senator Johnson and myself, we've been here now for a decade. We have hoped for that exact type of scenario that Senator Leahy just described to come about. And I don't doubt Senator Leahy's sincerity one bit in raising that point. That is exactly what we need. The incentives aren't there. The incentives on the part of those making these decisions to bring these things up with too little time for debate, amendment, or even reading the bill and discussing it with our constituents. Those making that decision have forestalled the kind of debate and discussion that needs to occur. The incentive structure is such that those making that very decision are not going to want to relinquish that immense power, particularly if they can be a part of and even control what goes into that bill, who knows about it, when, and then virtually guarantee passage on the Senate floor. Something has to change in order to alter that incentive structure to bring about exactly the kind of dynamic that Senator Leahy described. Look, we can do this. It's not that hard. But we're going to have to adopt some changes to our procedures. And ultimately, we owe it to our constituents not to bend unflinchingly and reflexively every single time somebody brings forward a spending bill at the very last minute. I remember one of many moments in which this has occurred arose in March of 2018. We had been anticipating for many months a spending bill. We had had a lot of conversations among and between members about the need to debate, discuss, and amend spending legislation before it was brought to the floor. We had been assured that we would have more of an opportunity than we had had in previous Congresses. And then one Wednesday evening in March of 2018, we received an email. The email arrived at, I believe, about 8:30, 8:45 in the evening. It told us attached is a copy of a spending bill. We'll be voting on this sometime in the Senate. We weren't told when. I opened the attachment. The attachment contained a 2,232-page spending bill, spending well over $1 trillion. We immediately started reviewing that. I divided up that legislation by section among my staff, and then spent the entire night and the entire following day reviewing that legislation. We got a basic understanding of what it did, but only rudimentary. A 2,232-page omnibus spending bill doesn't exactly read like a fast-paced novel. To my great astonishment, before we were even finished reading that bill, much less before we had the opportunity to even conceive of or draft amendments, much less propose them, the House of Representatives passed that bill without amendment before lunch the next day. The Senate passed the same legislation about 12 or 13 hours later. This process has repeated itself over and over again. We can't fool ourselves into believing that it's going to change without some alteration to procedure and to the set of incentives that perpetuate that vicious cycle. One that is no respecter of persons, it's no respecter of Republicans versus Democrats, liberals versus conservatives, or even senators versus representatives. This is just a fundamentally anti-American and undemocratic way of doing things. We can do better, and we must. Thank you, Mr. President.